Rich banker's daughter faced an unexpected punishment. After talking back to Judge Caprio, the morning of Tuesday, September 12th, 2023, arrived in Providence with the kind of late summer clarity that made everything feel sharp and defined. By 9:47 a.m., the parking lot outside Providence Municipal Court was nearly full. Compact sedans with faded paint, older model trucks, a few battered minivans bearing the wear of working families. And then, cutting through the rows of humble vehicles like a blade through cloth, came the pearl-white Tesla Model X. It moved silently, almost predatorily, past the entrance and swung directly into a handicapped parking space near the courthouse doors. No placard hung from the rearview mirror. No credentials were displayed on the dash. The driver simply stopped, as if the blue lines painted on the asphalt were a suggestion rather than a law. The door opened. Out stepped Madison Harrington, 24 years old, blonde hair pulled into a sleek, low ponytail. Designer sunglasses, Prada, dark-lensed, expensive, covering half her face. A tailored cream blazer over a silk blouse. Skinny jeans that probably cost more than most people in that courthouse made in a week. A Hermes Birkin bag dangling from the crook of her arm, caramel leather catching the sunlight. She didn't look around, didn't check if anyone noticed. She simply walked, heels clicking against the pavement with rhythmic confidence, toward the entrance of Courtroom 3A. Inside, the air was different, cooler, heavier. The kind of atmosphere that pressed down on people the moment they crossed the threshold. A reminder that this was not a place where charm or connections held automatic sway. Rows of benches stretched across the gallery, half filled with individuals waiting their turn. A man in his 60s wearing a faded denim jacket, hands folded in his lap. A young mother bouncing a toddler on her knee, worry etched across her face. An elderly woman clutching a stack of documents, lips moving silently as she rehearsed what she might say. Working people. People who couldn't afford to miss a day of work. People who rode the bus to get here. And then there was Madison. She entered with her phone in hand, thumbs moving across the screen in rapid, dismissive strokes. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a voice like gravel, stood near the front and called for attention. All rise for the Honorable Judge Frank Caprio. The gallery rose. Madison remained seated, eyes still locked on her phone. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Miss, please stand." She glanced up, rolled her eyes slightly and stood, but only halfway, one hip cocked, phone still glowing in her palm. The message was clear. She was here, but not really. This was an inconvenience, a formality, something to be endured and dismissed. Judge Frank Caprio entered from the side door and took his seat behind the bench. At 77 years old, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen everything and been moved by very little, except the truth. His face was kind but firm, lined with decades of listening, weighing, deciding. He wore reading glasses perched on his nose, and as he settled into his chair, he reached for the case file in front of him without a word. Ticket number PVD 09202344-1. Defendant, Madison Elizabeth Harrington, age 24. Daughter of Charles Harrington III, managing partner at Harrington Capital Management, one of the most influential investment firms in Rhode Island. The kind of family that funded galas, sponsored charity auctions, had their names etched into the marble walls of museums and hospitals. Judge Caprio opened the folder slowly, his eyes scanning the details. Violation date, August 29th, 2023. Time, 8:14 a.m. Location, Benefit Street, directly in front of Hope Elementary School. Speed, 68 miles per hour in a posted 30-mile-per-hour school zone. Traffic signal, red for 4.2 seconds at the time of passage. Officer, Luis Mendoza, Providence PD Traffic Division. The judge's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He read the line again. 68 miles per hour. School zone. Red light. He looked up. Madison was still texting. The courtroom had gone silent. The other defendants watched. The mother with the toddler stared. The elderly woman leaned forward slightly, as if sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and set them on the bench with deliberate care. His voice, when it came, was calm, measured, but it carried. "Miss Harrington." She glanced up, barely. "Yes?" Put the phone away. For a moment, she hesitated, as if considering whether the instruction applied to her. Then, with a faint sigh, she slipped the phone into her bag. She looked at him with the kind of neutral expression people wear when they're waiting for something to be over. Judge Caprio opened the file wider, his eyes moving across the page one more time. Benefit Street, Hope Elementary. 8:14 a.m., 20 minutes before the first bell, 20 minutes before hundreds of children would begin crossing that very intersection under the protection of crossing guards and traffic signals. He looked at Madison again. She met his gaze without flinching, but also without interest. There was no fear in her eyes, no nervousness, no sense that she understood where she was or what was at stake. She believed with every fiber of her being that this would go away. Judge Caprio folded his hands on the bench and leaned forward slightly. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "Do you understand why you're here today?" Madison shrugged. The movement was slight, but unmistakable. "It's just a ticket." The words hung in the air like smoke. The gallery shifted. Someone exhaled audibly. The bailiff's expression darkened. Judge Caprio didn't move. He simply watched her. And in that silence, the weight of everything she didn't yet understand began to settle around her like a net she couldn't see. The case was about to begin. Judge Caprio let the silence stretch for another beat before he spoke again. His voice remained even, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "Miss Harrington, I'm going to ask you a straightforward question, and I'd appreciate a straightforward answer. Do you understand the charge against you?" Madison shifted her weight, one hand resting on her hip. Her expression was somewhere between boredom and impatience, the look of someone who had been kept waiting too long at a restaurant. "It's just a ticket," she said, her tone light, dismissive. "I'm sure we can handle this quickly. I have a lunch meeting at noon." A lunch meeting. The words landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. The elderly woman in the third row stiffened. The young mother with the toddler looked down at her lap. The man in the denim jacket shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change. He glanced down at the file again, then back up at Madison. "Miss Harrington, on August 29th of this year, at 8:14 in the morning, you were clocked traveling at 68 miles per hour through a 30-mile-per-hour school zone on Benefit Street. You ran a red light that had been red for over 4 seconds. That school zone exists because hundreds of children cross that intersection every single morning. Do you understand the danger you created?" Madison's face tightened slightly, irritation flickering across her features. She let out a small breath, the kind people make when they're trying to be patient with someone they find unreasonable. "Your Honor, with all due respect, nobody was even there. It was early. School hadn't even started yet." Her voice carried the faint edge of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow to understand. Judge Caprio set the file down. He leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. His eyes never left hers. "You're right," he said quietly. "Nobody was there. No child was struck. No parent was killed. No crossing guard was sent to the hospital. You're absolutely right about that." Madison's shoulders relaxed slightly. She nodded as if vindicated. Judge Caprio continued, "But the law, Miss Harrington, doesn't exist because of what happened. It exists because of what could have happened. It exists to prevent tragedy, not to respond to it. You were 20 minutes away from children filling that crosswalk. 20 minutes from a moment where 68 miles per hour would have meant the difference between a child going home and a child never going home again. The fact that you got lucky doesn't change what you did." The courtroom was utterly silent now. Even the toddler had gone still. Madison's jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, something other than boredom crossed her face. Annoyance. Frustration. The realization that this wasn't going the way she expected. She straightened, her voice sharper now. "Look, I think we both know how this works. My father donates to half the charities in this city, including the Police Benevolent Fund. He's on the board at Rhode Island Hospital. He funds scholarships, community programs. He does more for this city than most people ever will." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "So I think we both know this is getting dismissed." The air in the courtroom seemed to contract. The gallery froze. The bailiff's eyes widened slightly. The young mother's mouth fell open. Someone in the back row inhaled sharply. Judge Caprio's face remained still, completely still. He didn't blink, didn't move. For a long, terrible moment, he simply looked at her. Then slowly, deliberately, he removed his reading glasses. He set them on the bench with a soft click. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but it carried more weight than anything he'd said so far. Miss Harrington. The way he said her name was different now. Colder, harder. In this courtroom, your last name earns you nothing. Your father's donations earn you nothing. Your family's position earns you nothing. You are here as a citizen of this state. No more, no less. And as a citizen, you are accountable for your actions under the same law as every other person in this room. Madison's face flushed. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She glanced toward her attorney, a sharp-looking man in his 50s seated at the defense table. But he avoided her gaze, his expression carefully neutral. She turned back to Judge Caprio, and something ugly flickered across her face. Disbelief, anger, indignation. She scoffed audibly, unmistakably, and shook her head. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The words were barely out of her mouth when the energy in the room shifted. The gallery leaned forward. The bailiff's posture stiffened. Judge Caprio's eyes darkened, and the lines around his mouth deepened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Excuse me?" Madison looked up, startled by the edge in his tone. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his hands flat on the bench. "Miss Harrington, if you have something to say it clearly, but I would strongly suggest you think very carefully about what comes out of your mouth next." The silence that followed was suffocating. Madison's breath came faster. Her hands, which had been resting casually at her sides, were now clenched. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly debating whether to intervene. But Madison said nothing. She simply stood there, her face flushed, her eyes burning with barely suppressed anger. Judge Caprio held her gaze for another long moment. Then he picked up his glasses, slid them back on, and returned his attention to the file in front of him. "We're going to proceed," he said quietly, "and you're going to listen." The courtroom remained frozen, the tension thick enough to choke on. Madison's chest rose and fell with sharp, shallow breaths. The veneer of confidence she'd walked in with was cracking, piece by piece, and everyone in that room could see it. This was no longer a simple traffic case. This was something else entirely. Judge Caprio shifts his attention to the prosecution table, a gesture so slight it barely disturbs the tension coating the room. He speaks without raising his voice. "The court calls Officer Luis Mendoza." The gallery rustles. All eyes turn toward the back of the courtroom. A man in full Providence PD blues rises from the last bench, compact, squared shoulders, graying at the temples. He's 46 years old and looks like someone who spent 19 years carrying the weight of traffic stops, near misses, and almost tragedies. He walks the aisle with practiced economy, each step quiet but deliberate. No theatrics, no swagger. He takes the stand, raises his right hand, swears to tell the truth. His voice is steady even, unhurried. Judge Caprio waits until Officer Mendoza settles into the chair, then asks him to state his name and assignment. "Luis Mendoza, Your Honor. Traffic Unit, 19 years with Providence PD." "Thank you, officer. Please walk the court through what you observed on the morning of October 4th. Officer Mendoza doesn't reach for notes. He doesn't need them. "I was stationed on Benefit Street, approximately 240 feet west of the intersection at Waterman. It was a Tuesday morning, 8:14 a.m. school zone. I had LiDAR equipment set up to monitor speeds approaching the crosswalk. He speaks like a man who has testified dozens of times but never carelessly. Every detail placed with surgical care. At 8:14 and 3 seconds, a white Tesla Model S entered my field of measurement. I clocked the vehicle at 68 miles per hour. Silence presses against the walls. The speed limit in that zone is 25. The red light at the intersection had been active for 4.2 seconds. The vehicle didn't slow. It passed through the intersection at full speed. Madison shifts in her seat. It's subtle, just her jaw tightening, her hands adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. Her attorney leans over and whispers something. She nods once, but doesn't respond. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly. You mentioned a crosswalk. Yes, Your Honor, there was a crossing guard present, Dorothy Clemens, 71 years old. She just stepped into the crosswalk with her stop sign raised. She was preparing to escort a group of elementary students across the street. The judge's expression doesn't shift, but his eyes sharpen. How close was she to the vehicle's path? Officer Mendoza pauses. Not because he doesn't know, because the answer sits heavy in his chest every time he says it aloud. Close enough that if a child had been 5 seconds earlier stepping off the curb, we wouldn't be in traffic court today, Your Honor. We'd be somewhere else. That sentence lands like a stone dropping into still water. The ripples move through the room in slow, cold waves. No one speaks. Not the prosecutor. Not the defense. Not Madison. Officer Mendoza continues. I pursued the vehicle and conducted a traffic stop 3 blocks east near Hope Street. The driver provided her license without objection. When I informed her of the violation, she said, he stops, looks down briefly, then back up. She said, just write it. My lawyer will make it disappear. Madison's face flushes. Her attorney shifts, adjusting his tie. Judge Caprio's gaze doesn't leave Officer Mendoza. Did anything happen after you issued the citation? Officer Mendoza nods slowly. Later that afternoon, I received a phone call. Deputy Chief's office. The caller suggested the ticket could be administratively resolved. No court involvement, no record, just handled quietly. And what was your response? I declined. Why? Officer Mendoza looks at Madison for the first time since taking the stand. It's not a glare. It's not accusation. It's something sadder, something tired. Then he turns back to the judge. Because children deserve better, Your Honor. The courtroom holds its breath. Judge Caprio nods once. Slow, deliberate, as if receiving something sacred. Thank you, Officer Mendoza. The officer stands, buttons his uniform jacket, and walks back down the aisle. His footsteps are the only sound. He returns to the back bench and sits. His hands rest flat on his knees. His face is calm, but his eyes carry the weight of 19 years of watching people like Madison walk into courtrooms believing the rules don't apply to them. Judge Caprio lets the silence linger a moment longer. Then he looks down at the file in front of him, flips a page, and prepares to move forward. But something has already shifted. The air in the room is thinner now, sharper. And Madison Harrison, for the first time since she walked through those doors, looks like someone who knows the ground beneath her is no longer solid. Judge Caprio looks down at the witness list, his reading glasses catching the overhead light. He doesn't rush. He never rushes. When he speaks, his voice is quieter than before, but it carries every ounce of authority the room has come to expect. The court calls Dorothy Clemens. There's a shift in the gallery, heads turning, whispers stilled. An elderly woman rises from the third row. She's wearing a lavender cardigan over a floral blouse, sensible shoes, and a name badge that still reads, Crossing Guard, Waterman Street. Her hair is silver, pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands tremble slightly as she smooths down her skirt. She walks to the stand with the careful steps of someone who's learned not to take balance for granted. The bailiff helps her up. She swears in, her voice firm despite the quiver in her fingers. Judge Caprio waits until she's settled, then offers a small, respectful nod. Mrs. Clemens, thank you for being here today. Can you tell the court what you do? She clears her throat, sitting up a little straighter. I'm a retired school teacher, Your Honor. Taught second grade for 34 years at Hope Elementary. Now I volunteer as a crossing guard every weekday morning. Same corner, same kids. And you were working that morning? October 4th? Yes, sir, I was. Can you walk us through what happened? Dorothy takes a slow breath. Her hands fold into her lap, one thumb rubbing over the other in a steady, nervous rhythm. It was just after 8 o'clock. The light had turned red. I stepped into the crosswalk with my stop sign raised, same as I do every morning. There were cars waiting on both sides. Everything was normal. And then she pauses. Her eyes drift somewhere past the judge, past the walls, into the memory itself. This white car came out of nowhere, like a blur. I didn't even have time to process it. 1 second the street was clear, the next second it was just there. Flying through the intersection, her voice cracks just slightly. I froze, she shakes her head. I didn't move. I couldn't. A parent in the drop-off lane honked, swerved. I heard tires screeching. And then it was gone. Judge Caprio leans forward, his elbows resting gently on the bench. Mrs. Clemens, are you all right? She nods quickly, wiping the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, I keep thinking about what could have happened. I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've never been afraid before. But now every morning when I step into that crosswalk, I wonder if someone's going to come through again. The silence in the courtroom is thick, almost suffocating. Judge Caprio gives her a moment, then gently, Mrs. Clemens, do you have a personal connection to that corner? To that school? Dorothy looks up, her eyes glisten. My granddaughter, Amara, she's 7. She crosses that intersection every single day. Judge Caprio's expression softens, but his voice remains steady. Is Amara here today? Dorothy nods. She looks back toward the gallery, and a small figure stands. A little girl, braided hair tied with bright yellow ribbons, a pink backpack slung over one shoulder. She's wearing a school uniform, white polo, navy skirt, sneakers with velvet laces. Her eyes are wide, cautious, but not afraid. Judge Caprio's tone shifts, gentler now, the voice of a grandfather, not a judge. Hi, Amara. The little girl's voice is small but clear. Hi. Do you know why we have crossing guards? She nods, serious. To keep us safe. That's right. And what happens if drivers don't follow the rules? Amara looks down at her shoes. Her voice drops to barely a whisper. Kids get hurt. The room holds its breath. Judge Caprio doesn't look away from her. He lets the weight of her words settle over every person in that courtroom like a blanket of cold truth. Then he shifts his gaze. Madison is staring at her phone. Her thumb scrolls slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. Her face is blank, unbothered, as if this moment, this child, this testimony is background noise to whatever message or notification has captured her attention. Judge Caprio's voice cuts through the silence like a blade. Miss Harrington. Madison doesn't look up. Miss Harrington. She glances up briefly, half a second, then back down. Judge Caprio's jaw tightens. His voice drops, slower now, each word deliberate. Look at her. The courtroom freezes. Madison's fingers stop moving. She doesn't lift her head immediately, but slowly, reluctantly, she raises her eyes, and there across the room stands Amara, 7 years old, braids, yellow ribbons, pink backpack. The little girl doesn't flinch, doesn't look away. She just stands there, small and still, her hands folded in front of her. Madison stares at her. For the first time since this trial began, something flickers across Madison's face. Not remorse, not quite, but something closer to discomfort, awareness, the faint, unwelcome recognition that the person standing across from her is real. The silence stretches. Judge Caprio doesn't break it. He lets Madison sit in it, lets the weight of that child's gaze press into her chest until the air feels too thin to breathe. Finally, Madison looks away. Amara sits back down, her grandmother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. Judge Caprio exhales slowly, almost imperceptibly. He thanks Mrs. Clemens, who nods and steps down from the stand with the same careful grace she arrived with. The courtroom remains silent, and for the first time, Madison Harrington looks small. Judge Caprio reaches for a manila folder resting at the edge of his bench. It's thicker than the others, bulging slightly, held together with a black binder clip. He opens it with the calm precision of someone who knows exactly what's inside and exactly what it means. He doesn't speak right away. He lets the silence build. Lets the weight of what's coming settle into the room before a single word is spoken. Then finally he looks up. The court has entered additional material into the record, phone logs, emails, correspondence related to this case. Madison's attorney, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair an expensive navy suit and cufflinks that catch the light, shifts in his seat. His expression doesn't change, but his posture tightens. He senses what's coming. Judge Caprio continues, his tone clinical, measured. Within 2 hours of Officer Mendoza issuing this citation, 3 phone calls were placed from the offices of Harrington Capital Management. The first call went to the assistant of Providence's police chief. The second went to the mayor's scheduler. The third went to a city councilman whose district includes the street where this violation occurred. He pauses, letting that sink in. Additionally, an email was sent to the traffic court administrator from what the sender described as a concerned constituent. The email suggested that the citation in question was, and I, quote, heavy-handed, and requested a courtesy review before any court proceedings move forward. Judge Caprio looks up from the document, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. The sender's email domain, harringtoncapital.com. The gallery murmurs, low, tense, a ripple of disbelief and recognition moving through the room. Madison's attorney rises smoothly, his voice composed but firm. Your Honor, with respect, this material is prejudicial. My client is here to answer for a traffic violation, not for actions taken by third parties over whom she had no control. Judge Caprio leans back in his chair, folding his hands across his chest. His eyes never leave the attorney. Counselor, your client handed Officer Mendoza her license and told him, just write it. My lawyer will make it disappear. 2 hours later, her father's office initiated a coordinated effort to do exactly that. This isn't prejudice. It's a pattern. The attorney opens his mouth to respond, but Judge Caprio raises a hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop him. Your client didn't just break the law. She expected the system to bend for her. That expectation is now part of this case. Madison's face flushes red. Her jaw clenches. Her hands, which had been resting flat on the table, curl into fists. And then for the first time she speaks. This is insane. Her voice cuts through the courtroom, sharp, indignant, rising in pitch. You're making me out to be some kind of monster over a traffic ticket. A traffic ticket. People run red lights every day. But because my last name is Harrington, suddenly I'm being dragged through this circus. She gestures wildly at the gallery, at the witness stand, at the judge himself. I didn't ask my father to make those calls. I didn't send that email. But you're acting like I orchestrated some criminal conspiracy. It's a ticket. That's all it is. The courtroom is dead silent. Judge Caprio doesn't react immediately. He just sits there, hands still folded, watching her, waiting, letting her words hang in the air long enough for everyone, including Madison herself, to hear them clearly. Then he speaks. His voice is calm, even, but underneath it, there's steel. Miss Harrington, you ran a red light at 68 miles per hour in a school zone. You blew through an intersection where a crossing guard was standing with her stop sign raised. A crossing guard whose granddaughter crosses that same street every single morning. He pauses. You didn't slow down. You didn't stop. And when you were pulled over, you showed no concern, no accountability, no remorse. You told the officer to just write it because you believed, correctly it seems, that your family could make it disappear. Madison's mouth opens, but no words come out. Judge Caprio leans forward now, his gaze unwavering. This isn't about a traffic ticket, Miss Harrington. This is about values. This is about whether you believe the rules apply to you. And based on everything I've seen and heard in this courtroom today, the answer is no. You don't. The silence that follows is suffocating. Madison stares at him, her face pale now, her hands trembling slightly. Her attorney places a hand on her arm, gently urging her to sit back, to stay quiet. But the damage is done. Judge Caprio closes the folder in front of him, the sound of paper against paper unnaturally loud in the stillness. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I'll hear closing arguments. He taps the gavel once. The bailiff calls the recess, and the courtroom begins to stir, people rising, whispering, filing out into the hallway. But Madison doesn't move. She sits frozen at the defense table, staring at nothing, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. For the first time, She looks like someone who's beginning to understand that the safety net she's relied on her entire life might not catch her this time. And the weight of that realization is crushing. The courtroom settles back into silence after the recess. People file in slowly, finding their seats, whispering in low tones that fade as soon as Judge Caprio returns to the bench. Madison sits at the defense table, her posture stiffer than before. Her hands rest in her lap, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles have gone white. Her attorney leans close, murmuring something she doesn't seem to hear. She just stares ahead, eyes fixed on nothing, her breathing shallow and controlled. Judge Caprio takes his seat, adjusts his glasses, and opens the folder in front of him one more time. He doesn't look at Madison immediately. He takes his time. Then finally he lifts his gaze and speaks. "Miss Harrington?" Her head snaps up. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly." Madison swallows, nods. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly, his voice calm but unyielding. "What would you have done if you had hit someone?" The question lands like a stone dropped into still water. Madison blinks, opens her mouth, closes it. Her attorney shifts beside her, but says nothing. She looks down at her hands, then back up at the judge. Her voice, when it finally comes, is quieter than it's been all day. I didn't." Judge Caprio doesn't move. "That's not what I asked." Silence, heavy, suffocating. Madison's hands begin to tremble. She presses them flat against the table, trying to steady them, but the tremor remains. She glances toward the gallery, toward Dorothy, sitting in the third row with Amara beside her. The little girl's eyes are wide, watching. Madison looks away quickly, her breath catching in her chest. "I don't know," she whispers. Her voice cracks. "I wasn't thinking." Judge Caprio's expression doesn't soften, but something shifts in his tone. Not anger, something deeper. Disappointment, maybe, or sorrow. "That's the problem, Miss Harrington. You weren't thinking about anyone but yourself." Madison's face flushes red. Her eyes glisten. She bites down on her lower lip, but it's not enough. A tear slips down her cheek. She wipes it away quickly, almost angrily, as if embarrassed by its presence. But more follow. Her shoulders begin to shake. Her attorney places a hand on her forearm, a gesture meant to steady her, but she doesn't seem to notice. She just sits there, unraveling. Judge Caprio watches her. He doesn't rush. He doesn't interrupt. He lets the moment breathe. Then gently he asks, "Are you sorry?" Madison nods quickly, her voice breaking. "Yes." "To whom?" Madison looks up, her face wet with tears. She turns in her seat, slowly, and looks directly at Dorothy Clemens, then at Amara. The little girl doesn't flinch, doesn't look away. Madison's voice is barely audible. "To you, to your granddaughter, to everyone." Dorothy's expression doesn't change. She doesn't smile, doesn't nod with forgiveness, but she holds Madison's gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then finally she inclines her head, just slightly, not absolution, just acknowledgement. Madison turns back toward the judge, her chest heaving with shallow, unsteady breaths. For the first time since walking into this courtroom, she looks small, vulnerable, human. Judge Caprio leans back in his chair, folding his hands across his chest. His voice is steady, measured, but there's a flicker of something else beneath it. Not compassion exactly, but possibility. "Miss Harrington, an apology is a starting point, but words are cheap. What matters is what you do next." Madison nods, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I understand. Do you?" Judge Caprio's gaze sharpens. "Because I'm not sure you do. You've lived your entire life insulated from consequence. You've had people smooth over your mistakes, erase your problems, shield you from accountability. That ends today." Madison's breath hitches. She nods again, more slowly this time. Judge Caprio leans forward. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Are you willing to prove that apology means something?" Madison stares at him, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. She hesitates, not because she doesn't want to say yes, but because, for the first time, she understands that saying yes will cost her something. Finally, she nods. Her voice is small but clear. Yes. Judge Caprio holds her gaze for a long moment. Then he nods once, almost imperceptibly. Good. He picks up his pen, makes a note on the file in front of him, then sets it down again. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of something immovable, something final. Because I'm about to give you that chance. The courtroom is silent. Madison sits frozen, her hands still trembling, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She doesn't know what's coming. But for the first time, she's afraid, not of losing, not of punishment, but of having to prove she's more than the person she's been her entire life. And that fear, more than anything else, is what tells Judge Caprio she might actually be ready to try. Judge Caprio closes the folder in front of him with a quiet finality. He removes his reading glasses, folds them carefully, and sets them down on the bench. For a moment, he just sits there, hands resting flat on the polished wood, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. The gallery is silent. Madison sits rigid at the defense table, her attorney beside her, both waiting. Dorothy Clemens sits in the third row, one hand resting lightly on Amara's shoulder. Officer Mendoza remains in the back, arms crossed, watching. Judge Caprio takes a slow breath, then speaks. Miss Madison Harrington, please rise. Madison stands. Her legs feel unsteady beneath her, but she locks her knees and straightens her spine. Her hands hang at her sides, fingers curled into loose fists. Judge Caprio's voice is even, measured, carrying the full weight of the bench. This court finds you guilty of reckless driving in a school zone in violation of Rhode Island General Law 31-14-1. You are hereby fined $2,500. 6 points will be assessed to your driving record. Your driving privileges are suspended for 90 days, effective immediately. Madison exhales slowly. Her attorney nods once, as if this is what they expected, as if this is manageable. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. Additionally, you are sentenced to 200 hours of community service. Madison's eyes flicker. Her attorney glances up. Judge Caprio continues, his tone sharpening. Those hours will not be served at a nonprofit gala. They will not be logged by writing checks or making phone calls. You will serve them at Hope Elementary School as a crossing guard assistant under the direct supervision of Mrs. Dorothy Clemens. The courtroom stirs. Whispers ripple through the gallery. Madison's face goes pale. Judge Caprio doesn't pause. You will report to the corner of Benefit and Waterman Streets 5 mornings per week from 6:45 a.m. to 8:45 a.m., rain or shine, for the next 6 months. You will assist Mrs. Clemens in ensuring the safety of the children whose lives you put at risk. You will hold a stop sign. You will stand in the crosswalk. You will look those children in the eyes every single morning. Madison's breath catches. Her hands begin to tremble again. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly. Furthermore, you will write a personal letter of apology to every parent in the Hope Elementary School District. Not a form letter. Not something drafted by your attorney. A letter in your own words, explaining what you did, why it was wrong, and what you are doing to make it right. He pauses, letting that settle. You will also attend a victim impact panel on traffic violence. You will listen to the stories of families who lost loved ones because someone like you decided the rules didn't apply to them. The room is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Judge Caprio's voice softens, just slightly, but the steel beneath it remains. And Miss Harrington, you will not arrive at that corner in a Tesla. You will take the bus. You will experience what it's like to rely on public transportation. You will learn what responsibility looks like when it can't be bought or delegated. Madison's eyes well with tears. She blinks rapidly, trying to hold them back, but they spill over anyway. Her attorney leans close, whispering something, but she shakes her head. Judge Caprio straightens in his chair. I'm giving you a choice. You can accept this sentence as I've outlined it, or you can refuse, in which case you will serve 30 days in the adult correctional institutions. And I will personally refer your case to the state attorney's office for prosecution on reckless endangerment charges which carry a maximum sentence of 1 year. The silence that follows is suffocating. Madison stares at Judge Caprio, her face wet with tears, her chest heaving. Her attorney touches her arm, a silent question. She doesn't look at him. She looks at Dorothy. The older woman meets her gaze, her expression unreadable. Not hostile, not forgiving, just steady. Then Madison looks at Amara. The little girl is watching her with those same wide, serious eyes, and something inside Madison cracks open even wider. She turns back to Judge Caprio. Her voice is raw, broken, barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Judge Caprio holds her gaze for a long moment. Then he nods once. "Then prove it." He picks up his gavel. The sound it makes when it strikes the bench echoes through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Court is adjourned. The room erupts. Whispers surge into murmurs, murmurs into conversation. Some people clap, slow, deliberate applause that builds into something louder. Others just sit in stunned silence, processing what they've witnessed. Madison stands frozen at the defense table, her hands still shaking, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her attorney gathers his papers, muttering something about filing motions, but she doesn't hear him. She just stands there, staring at nothing. Dorothy Clemens rises from her seat, takes Amara's hand, and quietly makes her way toward the exit. As she passes Madison's table, she pauses, just for a moment. Their eyes meet. Dorothy doesn't smile, doesn't speak, but she inclines her head, just slightly, and then continues walking. Madison watches her go, and for the first time in her life, she feels the full weight of what it means to be accountable. The bailiff gestures toward the side door. Madison's attorney touches her elbow, guiding her. She moves mechanically, one foot in front of the other, her mind still reeling. The gallery begins to empty. People file out into the hallway, their voices rising in heated debate. Some are satisfied, some are shocked. Some think the sentence is too harsh. Others think it's not harsh enough. But no one can deny one thing. Justice in this courtroom looked different, and Madison Harrington, for the first time in her life, will have to earn her way back. The rain started before dawn. By the time Madison stepped off the RIPTA bus at the corner of Benefit and Waterman Streets, the drizzle had settled into a steady rhythm, not heavy enough to justify an umbrella, but persistent enough to soak through everything. It was 6:41 a.m. on Monday, September 25th, 2023. The streets were still dark, lit only by the yellow glow of street lamps reflecting off wet pavement. She stood there for a moment, alone on the sidewalk, her breath visible in the cool morning air. She wore a yellow reflective vest over a plain gray sweatshirt, faded jeans, and old sneakers that were already damp from the short walk to the bus stop. No designer labels, no carefully curated outfit. No phone in her hand to document the moment for followers who had long since moved on. Just Madison. Invisible. Across the street, Dorothy was already there. The older woman moved with quiet efficiency, pulling orange cones from the back of a gray utility van and placing them in a careful line along the curb. She didn't look up when Madison approached, didn't acknowledge her. Just continued setting up the crosswalk zone with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of repetition. Madison hesitated at the edge of the curb, unsure whether to speak or wait. Her hands hung awkwardly at her sides. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. What she would say, how she would stand, what expression she would wear. But now, standing here in the drizzle with the city slowly waking around her, all of those rehearsals felt useless. Dorothy finally straightened, brushing rain from her jacket. She walked over to Madison without a word and handed her a stop sign. The octagonal paddle felt heavier than it looked. Dorothy's eyes met hers for just a second. No warmth, no judgment, just acknowledgement. "You stand here," Dorothy said, pointing to a spot near the painted crosswalk. "When kids come, you hold the sign. When they're across, you lower it. That's it." Madison nodded. Dorothy turned and walked to the opposite side of the street, taking her position with the same quiet authority. And then they waited. For the first 20 minutes, the intersection was silent except for the hiss of tires on wet pavement and the occasional rumble of a passing truck. Madison stood with the sign at her side, her fingers gripping the handle tightly. Her vest clung to her shoulders, soaked through. Her hair stuck to her forehead. She stared at the crosswalk, hyper-aware of every car that slowed, every face that turned toward her. At 7:02 a.m., the first family arrived. A mother in a raincoat walked toward the corner, holding the hand of a small girl in a pink backpack. The girl was chattering about something. Madison couldn't hear the words, but the mother wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Madison. Madison raised the stop sign, stepping into the street as she'd been instructed. The mother paused. Just for a second, her gaze swept over Madison's face, the vest, the sign, the wet sneakers. Recognition flickered there. Madison felt it like a pulse of heat across her skin. The mother's expression hardened. She leaned down and whispered something to her daughter, then guided her across the street without another glance. Madison lowered the sign. More families came. Some looked at her with curiosity, some with thinly veiled contempt. A few whispered to each other as they passed, their voices low but audible enough that Madison caught fragments. "That's her, isn't it? Can you believe? Heard she almost killed someone." Madison kept her eyes on the crosswalk. She raised the sign. She lowered it. She didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't defend herself. At 7:34 a.m., an older woman in a blue parka approached the corner with two children in tow. She stopped at the edge of the curb and looked directly at Madison. Her voice was cold, sharp, deliberate. "Hope you learned something." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Madison's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but the woman had already turned away, ushering the children across the street. Madison lowered the sign. Her hands were trembling. Across the intersection, Dorothy watched. She didn't say anything, didn't intervene, just stood there holding her own sign, her face unreadable. At 7:52 a.m., a small boy in a red jacket waved at Madison as he crossed. His mother pulled him along quickly, but the boy twisted around and waved again, his smile wide and innocent. Madison lifted her hand hesitantly and waved back. The boy grinned and disappeared around the corner. That small gesture cracked something inside her. Not relief, not absolution, just the faintest recognition that she was still human, still visible, even if only to a child who didn't know her name. By 8:30 a.m., the rush had ended. The street fell quiet again. Madison's vest was soaked through, her sneakers squished with every step. Her fingers ached from gripping the sign. Dorothy walked over and took the paddle from her hands without a word. "Same time tomorrow," Dorothy said. Madison nodded. She walked back to the bus stop, her head down, her body heavy with exhaustion. She didn't pull out her phone, didn't check for messages, didn't think about what anyone else might be saying or thinking or posting. She just sat on the cold bench and waited for the bus. For the first time in years, Madison felt invisible. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that was a punishment or a relief. By mid-December 2023, the cold had settled into Providence like a weight that wouldn't lift. Madison stepped off the bus at 6:32 a.m., 13 minutes earlier than required. The sky was still dark, the air sharp enough to sting her lungs with every breath. She had stopped wearing the designer coat weeks ago. Now it was a thick navy parka from a thrift store on Wickenden Street, a knit hat pulled low over her ears, and gloves with frayed fingertips. In her backpack, she carried hand warmers, the kind you crack and shake to activate. She had learned that the cold was different when you stood still for 2 hours. Dorothy was already at the corner, as always, setting up the cones with the same quiet efficiency. But this time, when Madison approached, Dorothy glanced up and gave a small nod. Not warm, not forgiving, just acknowledgement. Madison nodded back. By now, she knew the rhythm of the morning. She knew which parents arrived first. The ones rushing to catch the early shift at the hospital, the ones juggling 2 kids and a toddler in a stroller. She knew which children walked alone, which ones needed extra time, which ones would wave or smile or ignore her completely. She knew their names. Amara was the girl in the pink backpack who always hummed while she walked. Elijah was the boy with the red jacket who had waved at her on that first terrible morning. Sophia was quiet, holding her mother's hand tightly every day. Marcus was the one who walked with a slight limp, his wheelchair folded and carried by his father on days when the sidewalks were too icy. Madison had started bringing extra hand warmers for Marcus. At 7:04 a.m., he arrived with his father, both of them bundled against the cold. The father was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his face lined with exhaustion. Madison had learned he worked nights at a warehouse in Pawtucket. He never said much, but he always made sure Marcus got across safely. This morning, the crosswalk was slick with ice. Madison stepped forward before they reached the curb. "Morning, Marcus." The boy looked up, his face half hidden by a scarf. "Morning, Miss Madison." She crouched down slightly, pulling two hand warmers from her pocket. "Thought you might need these today." Marcus's eyes widened. He took them carefully, cracking one between his palms. His father met Madison's gaze, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. "Thank you," he said quietly. Madison raised the stop sign, stepping into the street. She walked beside Marcus as he crossed, one hand hovering near his shoulder in case he slipped. When they reached the other side, she waited until they were safely on the sidewalk before returning to her post. Dorothy was watching from across the street. She didn't say anything, but Madison saw the faintest trace of approval in the older woman's eyes. The weeks had changed things in small, almost invisible ways. Parents who had once whispered now nodded. A few said good morning. A teacher named Mrs. Alvarez had brought Madison a thermos of coffee one particularly frigid morning, setting it down on the corner without a word before heading into the school. Madison had cried in the bathroom that night. By late December, Dorothy had started trusting her with more responsibility. She let Madison manage the crosswalk alone during afternoon pickup while she directed traffic at the intersection. She let Madison handle the whistle, the sign, the calls to slow down or stop. Madison no longer fumbled. She moved with purpose, her voice steady, her presence sure. She no longer checked her phone. She no longer wondered what people were saying about her online. She just showed up and she listened. She heard parents talk about shift work that started at 4 a.m. and ended at midnight, about daycare that cost more than rent, about buses that didn't run on time and paychecks that didn't stretch far enough. She heard exhaustion in their voices, frustration, love, fear. She began to understand the weight of the morning rush, not as an inconvenience, but as survival. And then on December 18th, everything sharpened into focus. It was 7:41 a.m. The crosswalk was full, 3 families crossing at once, children laughing, parents talking. Madison stood in the street with her sign raised, her whistle around her neck. A silver sedan approached from the east. Too fast. Madison saw it before anyone else did. The driver wasn't slowing, wasn't stopping. The car rolled through the stop sign like it wasn't there. Madison's body moved before her mind caught up. She blew the whistle, sharp, loud, piercing. She stepped forward, directly into the path of the car, her stop sign raised high. "Stop!" The driver slammed the brakes. The car skidded on the icy pavement, tires screeching, and came to a halt inches from Madison's knees. She could feel the heat of the engine, could see the driver's wide eyes through the windshield. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The families on the crosswalk froze. Children stared. Parents pulled them closer. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dorothy was there, her hand on Madison's shoulder, firm and grounding. "You good?" Dorothy asked, her voice low. Madison nodded, though her legs were shaking. "Yeah, I'm good." Dorothy squeezed her shoulder once, then turned to the driver and waved him through with a sharp gesture. The sedan crept forward, the driver pale and shaken. Dorothy looked back at Madison. "Now you understand." Madison met her eyes. She did. She understood what it meant to stand between a child and a car, to be responsible for a life that wasn't hers, to feel the weight of that moment, that choice, that proximity to something irreversible. "Yeah," Madison said, her voice hoarse. "I understand." That evening, a local news segment aired on Channel 10. The title read, "From Defendant to Advocate." The footage showed Madison at the crosswalk, holding her stop sign, helping a child across the street. The anchor's voice was neutral, but the comments section beneath the online video was a war zone. Some praised her, others called it performative. A few said she didn't deserve redemption. Madison didn't read them. She just set her alarm for 6:15 a.m. and laid out her clothes for the next morning, because she would be there. Rain or shine, cold or heat, she would show up. On March 18th, 2024, the morning arrived like any other. Madison stepped off the bus at 6:29 a.m., the air still cool but softer now, carrying the first hints of spring. The sky was beginning to lighten earlier each day, and the corner of Benefit and Waterman Streets felt different than it had 6 months ago. Familiar, almost like home. Dorothy was there, as always, setting up the cones. But this morning she wasn't alone. A small group of parents stood nearby, holding coffee cups and talking quietly. A few children waited on the sidewalk, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. Madison slowed as she approached, uncertain. Dorothy turned and met her eyes. There was something in the older woman's expression that Madison had never seen before. Not quite warmth, but close. Recognition. Respect. "Morning," Dorothy said. "Morning," Madison replied. Dorothy reached into her jacket and pulled out a small envelope. She held it out without ceremony, without explanation. Madison took it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the flap. Inside was a card, hand-decorated, covered in crayon drawings and signatures in uneven, childish handwriting. "Thank you, Miss Madison. You kept us safe. We will miss you." And in the center, a drawing by Amara, a stick figure in a yellow vest holding a stop sign, surrounded by smiling children. Above it, in careful letters, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Madison's vision blurred. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold it in, but the tears came anyway. She covered her mouth with one hand, the card clutched tightly in the other. Dorothy stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid." Madison nodded, unable to speak. The parents stepped closer, one by one. A few shook her hand. Mrs. Alvarez, the teacher, who had brought her coffee, gave her a brief hug. Marcus's father nodded from across the street, his expression solemn but kind. And then the children came. Amara, Elijah, Sophia, Marcus. They gathered around her, their faces bright and open. And for a moment, Madison felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen, not for who she had been, but for who she was becoming. 2 weeks later, on April the 2nd, 2024, Madison returned to the same courtroom where her case had begun. But this time, there was no tension, no fear, no arrogance, just quiet anticipation. Judge Caprio entered at 10:03 a.m., his robe crisp, his expression thoughtful. Madison stood at the defense table, her hands folded in front of her. Her father sat in the gallery, silent and composed. Dorothy sat beside him. The courtroom was nearly empty, but it didn't feel that way. It felt full. Judge Caprio reviewed the file in front of him, then looked up. "Ms. Harrington," he began, his voice steady, "you have completed 200 hours of community service at the Fox Point School Zone. Officer Dorothy Reyes has submitted a report detailing your conduct, your growth, and your commitment. I've read it. I've also seen the coverage, the letters, the testimony from parents and teachers." Madison's throat tightened. She nodded. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "You came into this courtroom 6 months ago with a belief that your name, your connections, your resources would shield you from accountability. You were wrong." Madison's eyes stung, but she held his gaze. "You leave this courtroom today having learned something far more valuable. You learned that your actions define you, not your name, not your father's reputation, not the privileges you were born into. Your choices, your willingness to repair harm, your ability to stand in the cold at 6:30 in the morning and protect children you don't know." He paused, letting the words settle. "That's the lesson. That's the justice." Madison's voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Caprio signed the order in front of him. "Your license is hereby restored, effective immediately with conditions. You will complete annual traffic safety courses for the next 3 years. You will continue volunteer work in community safety programs, and you will report back to this court in 1 year to confirm your compliance." Madison nodded. "I will." Judge Caprio set down his pen and looked at her one last time. "You didn't just pay a debt, Ms. Harrington. You became part of the solution. Don't forget that." "I won't." The gavel fell softly. The hearing was over. In the months that followed, Madison enrolled in a nonprofit management program at Brown University, focusing on traffic safety advocacy and community engagement. She attended city council meetings. She spoke at a state legislative hearing on school zone enforcement, her voice steady and clear as she detailed what she had learned on that corner. About responsibility, about vulnerability, about the weight of a single moment. Dorothy attended that hearing. She sat in the back row, arms crossed, listening. When Madison finished, Dorothy caught her eye and gave a small nod. In late August, a letter arrived at Madison's apartment. It was written in careful, looping handwriting on lined paper decorated with stickers. Dear Miss Madison, I am 8 now. I start 3rd grade next week. My teacher says you might come back to help at the crosswalk in the fall. I hope you do. I miss seeing you in the mornings. Love, Amara. Madison read the letter 3 times, then she called Dorothy. I'm coming back, Madison said. Dorothy didn't hesitate. Good. We start September 5th, 6:30 a.m. I'll be there. The case became a teaching tool. Law schools used it in seminars on restorative justice. Judicial training programs referenced it in discussions on creative sentencing. Not because of the crime, but because of the repair. In a follow-up interview for a judicial podcast, Judge Caprio reflected on the case with the kind of quiet conviction that had defined his career. Justice isn't just about punishment, he said. It's about transformation. Madison Harrington didn't just serve her time. She became part of the community she endangered. She learned the names of the children she could have hurt. She stood in their place and understood what it meant to protect them. That's the justice our communities deserve, not retribution, restoration. The interviewer asked if he believed Madison had truly changed. Judge Caprio didn't hesitate. I don't believe in perfect redemption, he said, but I believe in effort. I believe in showing up. And Madison Harrington showed up. Every single morning, rain or shine. That's not performance, that's transformation. On September 5th, 2024, Madison stepped off the bus at 6:27 a.m. The air was cool. The sky was beginning to lighten. Dorothy was already there, setting up the cones, and Amara was waiting at the corner, her pink backpack bright against the morning gray. Madison raised her hand in a small wave. Amara waved back, smiling, and for the first time in a long time, Madison knew exactly where she belonged.